This is Garis, Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 549, part 2, entitled, How Many Years in Jail for Paternity Fraudsters? Carrying straight on. Concretely, these GEC masculist politicians will create new masculist laws, new men-fair laws, that will profoundly reform the divorce courts by, for example, throwing out alimony, giving custody to both parents jointly by default, so that young men no longer argue, quote, I'm not going to face a 1 chance in 4 of losing my kids. Fuck that. Fuck marriage and fuck paternity. I'm going to live the MGTOW lifestyle. I may fuck women, but I'm certainly not going to marry one. And even more certainly, I'm not going to have a kid with one. Not when the divorce courts are so hatefully biased against men. Paternity really sucks, so no way am I going to be sucked into that trap by the hated, fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders who control the divorce courts. End quote. The GEC masculist politicians will reform the divorce courts by forcing them, by law, to operate on the principle of financial independence of the divorcing parties. That is, the mother and the father are both assumed to be FIPs, so that one parent does not parasite off the money and labour of the other. The GEC masculist politicians will make the fipping of women, especially young women at high school, where most of the fluffy crapper damage is done, high priority, so that the reform of the divorce courts becomes a lot more practical, since when nearly all women are FIPs, then the divorce rape of men becomes much less frequent. The GEC masculist politicians will legislate 2 major gender laws, namely the PARER, it's P-A-R-E-R, that's paternity rejection right, and the OPTAB, O-P-T-A-B, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births, to give men the same right to reject an unwanted pregnancy as women have, so that a man is not forced by a woman to pay for the kid she wanted but he did not want, thus manslaving him for decades of his life, a major and horrific gender crime by her against him that should be punished by law, which I will deal with in more detail later. The OPTAB, O-P-T-A-B, is designed to block women's paternity fraud, where the husband is not the father, which occurs, according to a study in the UK, at a rate of 1% of pregnancies in the upper middle class, and at a rate of 30% in the lowest socio-economic class. Thus, a third of those low-class mothers are forcing a man to pay for a kid in capital letters that is not even his for several decades of his life. With the OPTAB, if the husband/boyfriend learns that the kid is not his, then with the PARER, he can reject paying for it for decades of his life. If the husband/boyfriend has proof that the mother has lied to him about the kid being his, then he can prosecute her for paternity fraud, which brings me to the title of this flyer, namely, what kind of legal punishment should be inflicted upon a woman who commits the major gender crime of paternity fraud? Question mark. You could say that thinking about the levels of punishment for gender crimes committed by women against men is the 3rd major stage of masculism, or as a part of the 2nd stage, that is, the political stage. So masculists are pushing for the establishment of a masculist jurisprudence, that is, thinking about the philosophy of law concerning the punishment of women's gender crimes against men. This is a new topic for the law. So those readers/viewers of this flyer who are lawyers and philosophers, who are masculists, Here is a topic for you to pioneer. Since I'm not a lawyer, and certainly no expert in masculist jurisprudence, I can only offer tentative suggestions on how to punish female gender criminals. So to be specific, how to punish a paternity fraudster, that is, a woman who lies to her husband/boyfriend that the kid growing in her is his. If the pregnancy is an accident, then the man can use the para to not pay for the kid. The mother then faces the choice of either aborting it, or if she decides to take it to term, then she, by law, takes full financial responsibility for the costs of the kid. If she is a FIP, she can afford it, which is one of the many reasons why masculists place such powerful moral pressure on women to fib up or to rot on the shelf, utterly rejected by men who refuse to be manslaved by fluffy vermin. But say the pregnant woman lies to her man that the kid is his and that the man wants the kid, but discovers that the kid is not his via the OPTAB, and he has proof that his woman has lied to him all along. Then he can prosecute her using the new men fair gender laws. So the mother goes into the court to be prosecuted for paternity fraud, and imagine she is found guilty by a jury, and the judge then hands down the punishment. What should that punishment be? What jurisprudential principles should be used to decide on an appropriate punishment? When the GECs are set up, the GEC masculist politicians will be faced with questions like this. Here are my 2 cents worth, speaking as a masculist, but not as a jurisprudential masculist, since I am no expert in such matters. Firstly, paternity fraud is a major gender crime committed by women against men, causing men to pay for a kid that is not even his and for 2 decades of his life. I have several suggestions for a suitable punishment. One is as follows. I read that it costs about $250,000 to raise a kid in the US. So if a woman forces a man to raise a kid that is not even his, then she has, in a manner of speaking, robbed him of $250,000. So the punishment should be about the same as if somebody actually robbed someone of $250,000. That amount of money is grand theft and would typically land the thief in jail for years, typically about 10 years, according to Google. That seems reasonable to me. But another argument is that the man is forced to pay for the kid for 2 decades of his life, thus manslaving him for that long period. So that makes the crime more serious than just grand theft. So the punishment should be greater, say 15 years. If the woman, the paternity fraudster, is convicted, then once in prison, she should be forced, by law, to work for her keep in prison to cover the costs paid for by the state for her incarceration and for the costs of the kid. The man should not be forced to pay for a kid that is not his, especially when the mother has lied to him that the kid is his. Forcing a man to pay for a kid that is not his for 2 decades of his life is a massive and barbaric gender injustice to men, which fills masculists with a burning sense of injustice and hatred towards women who do this, and towards today's state and legal system that does not prosecute such paternity fraudster vermin. Similar thinking can also be applied to the other major form of what the masculists call forced fatherhood, that is, pill lying, where the woman lies to her boyfriend/husband that she is taking the pill.